Every club.
Every day.
The Global Sports Podcast Network.
Hello and welcome to the Daily Southampton, part of the Global Sports Podcast Network. Today it is myself who will be hosting this podcast alongside my good friend and co-host, Greg Elliott. How are you doing, bud?
Yeah, I'm all right, mate. I'm excited about today. Looking forward to hear what you got to say. I do like these type of episodes.
Just me ranting for 25 minutes uninterrupted, except when I ask you to interrupt me.
Well, we've had the fair share of it going the other way too. Just these
This is also
episodes run
true.
together nicely.
It's a skill I have in real life as well as the podcasting space, which is always good to have. Obviously, we're recording this on transfer deadline day as well, so we've still got a lot of exciting evening of football field information to fill our boots. So yeah, this is sort of I say an essay. It'll probably be easier to actually bounce off of you, but it was some musings that I wrote down after we'd had a discussion. And it was about how you talked about how 10 years is a long time in football, and you were talking about us potentially being in the Europa League in 10 years' time, and I laughed it off. But then 10 years ago, we got into, well, not 10 years ago, potentially 10 years ago at this point, we got into the Europa League, and we had European nights, and it's insane to think about because of our current predicament. So I guess what this is like a case for hope, and I'll explain some of the reasons why, and some of the sort of long-term listeners and you, Greg, know that my background in football is not as long and as vast as a vast majority of football fans or yourself. And we're often the targets and scapegoats of, being a fake fan. I can't imagine anyone would think I'm a fake fan of Southampton, of all teams, because come on, we're not exactly, but it is one of those things. I've also got friends that have adopted clubs later on. One of my friends adopted Bolton as his club because he picked a team one year that got promoted because he didn't want to support his dad's team, which was Spurs. And now is stuck supporting League One Bolton, who at one point were almost like minutes away from financial ruin.
But arguably still better than supporting Spurs.
There you go. Sort of university was a huge turning point for me, and that's when all of a sudden, like, a lot of the people I was speaking to and going out drinking with, talking about football at the time, would go to a bar in Winchester called The Exchange, which often showed like Champions League. Would go to quite a lot of watch a lot of games, and I started going to games with my friend Katie as well. And I think the biggest turning point for me getting what I'd refer to as obsessed and understanding a lot more about it than I thought I did was obviously breaking my foot the year I met my wife in 2014, which resulted in me playing Football Manager a lot over that summer, a heck of a lot. So I guess what my point is that my passion started during a time that was later than most, and was during a time where the club was moving into peak success mode, right? It was kind of when we got into the Premier League and you had the first great season back with Pochettino. I did go to one of the championship games where I can't pretend I didn't remember a lot of it. I think we beat West Ham, and it was some of my cousins and stuff were there. It was a great time. But again, we've been drinking since about 10 a.m. and got to the game. I think it was like a 5 p.m. game. So because my passion started later, it's like I experienced the lofty times of sort of the Europa League and the bottom of the Prem, and the Championship, and whatever we are in the position that we are now. And I don't think ever have we looked as much as an easy 3 points to most other clubs than we do now. And on top of that, we've had 2 or 3 of what could potentially be seen as the most disastrous transfer windows, with our most recent maybe being our worst ever. I think that some of the players, the only real mainstay is Taylor Harwood-Bellis, really. A lot of the rest of them are all kind of going out the door on loan. We're starting to see rumours of today, because we don't know if it's already happened yet, but there's rumours of Cameron Archer potentially leaving and going on some sort of deal to Leeds. You've even got talk of Flynn Downs, who was such an integral part of our championship escape, potentially also going, because he's no longer part of the plans of the current manager, because of all these philosophies and systems and other random things that probably, if anyone was looking at the way that the club should have been built long term, should have probably done a bit better of a job. But it's not the same as it was. It's not the same as it was before I got into football, when the club almost ceased to exist. Greg, you'll have long memories of that, and a lot of sort of the older fan base will remember how bad it got and how we were hoping anyone would take us over. And it's one of the things that when we make the sort of jokes and laugh about the new ownership. And don't get me wrong, I'll get onto them. I'll get there, but we do have owners that have money, and the club doesn't look like it's about to liquidate. And as the pessimist, that is how I will start my case for hope. And it hasn't been the full amount of time before we take an ad break, but it feels like a pivotal time to do it. So, Greg, can we hear from our partners at Zencastr?
Absolutely, we can. So, here at the Global Sports Podcast Network, we spent a lot of time selecting our delivery platform, and Zencastr came out the clear winner. With 4K video recording from your phone and AI editing that automatically removes all those ums and ahs, it's super easy to start a podcast that sounds great and is delivered efficiently. If you're ready to tell your story, check out the link in the show description to learn more about Zencastr.
So we are back, and one of the things I wanted to start off with is sort of you look at our owners now and look at where the ownership has been. And when Lieber took over, you could tell how much he cared about the club, and he saved it. And that's why he's an integral part of the Southampton story. His daughter wasn't as much into football, and she kept it going, I think, probably for her dad's sake. But it's like if I owned a family business that I had absolutely no real passion or stake in, therefore, I would also probably at some point want to not work there. One of the bigger problems is who took that big percentage, right? So it's a part of the Southampton history that, as much as we complain about Sports Republic being clueless, let's not pretend that Gal, who took over beforehand, was significantly worse. There was so much excitement potentially when he came in, except there wasn't. There wasn't an ounce of excitement because the first thing that everyone might have not remembered is that he failed the ownership test the first time round, and then did some jiggery pokery to make sure that didn't happen the second time round. We then went on to be sponsored by, well, it felt like some sort of illegal shell company, right? Like LD Sports. Greg, what are LD Sports to this day? Can you tell me?
Nope. Somewhere between a gambling brand and a retail brand that didn't
Right,
really exist.
it's supposed
Something?
to be some sports media company. If I remember rightly, it was like us, and there was another, I want to say Spanish La Liga or Portuguese team that were the two faces of LD Sports, and it was just weird sort of shell articles, like someone had it's like somebody had been told what a website was, and they built a website off that description, and other than that, they didn't have anything. Now, it was that bad. Just to remind everybody that mid-season they had to withdraw the shirts and replace them with new shirts for the new sponsor. So if you'd already purchased a shirt like I had, they would send you, as you showed proof of purchase, they'd send you a new shirt out with the sponsor on it, which obviously wasn't a much better sponsor, but at least the company was like real? Question mark. Like, I think that there's a lot to be said about our sponsorship now. But it very much felt like at the time we were kind of being owned by and sponsored by something that wasn't real, and it kind of felt gross. And it was some of his later comments and his, you talk about our ownership now, and you talk about how the lack of communication, and sometimes it's frustrating they don't just say stuff. But then again, we've also recently just covered our now, the now person chairman in charge of footballing operations, who gave a interview to media, which he didn't have to do. You could just say nothing, acknowledging the situation, acknowledging how bad it is. But like, you would have never really seen Gao say a lot. In fact, he gave an interview, and he gave an interview to former Eastleigh MP Mims Davis, who was also sports secretary for the Conservative government at the time. And that's where we got the famous quote that everyone knows what I'm about to say, which is, "I'm not treating Southampton as a pig to be fattened and sold. I'm treating it as a child. But my children must believe they cannot depend on the boss. I have said to Southampton, I am now your father, but I'm putting you on the right track. You need to feed yourself." That to me makes no sense in this, because if he was trying to grow something and letting Southampton do its own thing, usually you're a parent, you'll give your world to your kids, right? You
Yeah.
wouldn't just kind of go, Great. Well, now I've got you and I own you. Figure it out. Figure it out. No investment. No nothing. Just a lot of it was very. A lot of the rhetoric that came out is just somebody that kind of would rock up and is realistically just trying to cash out what he could from the club, right? And then it wasn't. People think it's bad now. People think the ownership are bad now. It was worse just because we didn't get relegated. Remember, we very much almost did. We were like a Gabbiadini goal away from being in the Championship with an owner that didn't invest, and we could have ended up like Reading, easy. It's not that hard. It's happened to many clubs before. So we've had lots of managers that have been great. We've had Pochettino, we've had Koeman. In some regards, Hasenhüttl, depending on your opinions. He, regardless of your opinions on him now, came in and performed some little miracles, I guess. And as much as he was ridiculed for beating Liverpool, imagine the lofty heights of us beating Liverpool right now. Imagine Russell Martin shedding a tear from the corner of his eye as he managed to beat Liverpool. It would be like absolute football poetry. Yet, this man who had spent a lot of his time battling Klopp, and this man who had a lot of passion and love for the club, being emotional about a game that we're all very emotional about. Otherwise, most of you wouldn't be listening to a daily podcast talking about a football club. And a vast majority of us wouldn't get as angry as we get about things because we care about the club. So that's just a little weird personal thing that I just wanted to put in there because I find that him getting a lot of flack for that is real toxic. It's just a bit weird. So yeah, that was that. And then in sort of 2022, the club was bought out by Sports Republic. Ralph was kept, and as much as we want to say, oh well, they've made so many bad decisions. Like, well, yeah, but they tried to bring in somebody who they thought knew about football, right? I think his name is Gareth Shields. He was the guy that was in charge of like Man City's recruitment. And what happened is we basically brought in the entirety of Man City, or at least most of their youth team, right? We had Bazunu come in, who is still a starter now, if not in comparison to Ramsdale, but he played most of the Championship, and probably there's an interesting case there as to whether he got injured, we would have bought Ramsdale or not, right?
Yeah.
So it's a hypothetical, but we had Romeo Lavia that ended up producing us tons of money in sales. Aribo, who has now come into form and has had patches of form, but has always been a solid squad player since he's been in. Adozi, who's now in the Champions League on loan, who will probably be able to do more as he matures. We also brought in Bella Kotchap in that window. Say what you will, he did play quite well during the season we went down, but if he played better, we wouldn't have gone down. Like say that about most players. But it didn't work out, right? 12 points from 14, and it was dramatically bad, which is funny because what we had killed for 12 points now, and Hasenhüttl was gone. And then they made their second biggest mistake, which was to bring in Nathan Jones, which was possibly the most disastrous pick they could have. And they have hopefully learned from that, right? And I think that there are already signs that they have. Juric might not be the best ever, but Juric was the one they wanted originally. I think he was somewhere else at the time, and they couldn't really get him. So they got somebody they saw as gettable, but they clearly now
statistically
on
one
things.
of the best managers in Europe. Let's not forget,
mate. He's just entirely a quote machine at this point. and he was, he was what, a caricature. He created probably the biggest reaction out of every Saints fan on Twitter I've ever seen, which was uniting the entire fan base behind #JonesOut. And still have fond memories of that time. We were all united in our absolute desire to make him leave, and then he left and went on to bigger, brighter things at Charlton. No offense, Greg. I know that your dad played for Charlton, but not
the lofty heights they once were, unfortunately.
Yeah, it's not like it was back in the day. But even with that, they still tried. Let's not forget that the two players that are supposedly transformed in most recent form were purchased in that January panic buy window. So Sulemana, Onuachu, both purchased during that time. And then we also have Bree, who is, I don't think, gets half as much credit as he should, considering he was, I would count him basically as a free at £750,000. Like the fact he's getting picked over other players says a lot. The fact that he has now been sort of worked his way into squads managed by, well, at this point, it will be 4 different managers if you conclude Celis as well, shows a lot. And then also Alcaraz, who ironically, again, buying players for systems not very good, because we sold a player that would probably suit us very well now. And a fan favourite. I miss Charlie Alcaraz. He was a good lad.
Yeah.
And also Orsic, which, that didn't turn out that well, really. But again, it's interesting that it was seen as a disaster. It was seen as panic buying. But now, finally, some of those situations are bearing fruit, right? Kind of. We're still probably going to get relegated, but like those players were brought in for something, and they are showing the qualities they have and why they were identified as players to be brought in.
Mm.
But alas, we were relegated, and changes happened again up top. And that's when the club, they decided not to hold on to Celis. He's gone on to, move on to Reading, now Hull City. His career and stock is growing, but they realised they needed a manager to do better. And they wanted to get a successful manager who would play exciting, quote unquote, at times. It's not always the best football to watch, in Russell Martin in 2023. And regardless of our opinions now on how out of his depth he was in the Premier League, we did really, really well in the Championship. We could have kept with Sellers, and we could have ended up mid-table, and we could be stuck in that loop of losing all of our players in the Championship forever, but we didn't. It was gross. It was not the prettiest at the time. It was somehow a massive unbeaten run, which still managed to make us finish 4th. But we were promoted
because we could only draw.
Yeah, but not as bad as Burnley now, mate. Have you been keeping up with their 0-0s?
Isn't it like double-digit consecutive games or something stupid like that?
It is incredibly upsetting. But that's kind of what happened, right? Is that we came back up, but during that time and towards the end, before we came back up, before we knew we were going to come back up, we also lost some important parts of the footballing side of the business, right? They put too many of their eggs in one basket. One of those baskets being Jason Wilcox, who was never replaced, and him leaving was a problem because he was kind of the supposed brains behind a lot of the actual footballing side of the business. And all of those things kind of caused the situation that we've got now, where up until Juric kind of came in with his people, it meant that it was essentially Russell Martin and Matt Gill. And to this day, we still don't know who planned that transfer window, right? It's a very weird thing. But we'll talk about that after a word from our partners at the Global Sports Podcast Network. The Global Sports Podcast Network is changing the face of football podcasting with dedicated daily content for every Premier League team, women's football, fantasy football, and a daily Premier League wrap-up broadcasted in 5 different languages. This is your one-stop shop for your daily football fix. Find GSPN wherever you find your usual podcasts. And we're back. So how you keeping on, Greg? You good?
I'm enjoying it, mate. I'm looking forward to when we get to the hope bit.
Yeah, so I'm very aware, right? So I'm afraid there's still some downsides to talk about first, but we'll get there. In fact, one of the lines down on my notes shortly is, "But Zach, where is the hope?" Because I'm aware of how this plays out. But obviously, we came back up, and Jason Wilcox wasn't here. We had Russell Martin still, and he was given far too much time to turn around a bad situation, and it did not come to fruition. Some of that is definitely down to potential refereeing decisions. We are not the only club that suffered those potential refereeing decisions. Go back to any crossover we've had, go back to any mention of the name Anthony Taylor, and everybody is going to be upset. We were on the worst run we've ever had after a season where we probably had the best run we'd ever had. We had the heights of Wembley and the lows of the Tottenham game. So, Greg, you asked me, where is the hope? I like to believe in the good of people, and I like to believe that people can learn, right? And you've brought this up quite often too. And this is where we're quite aligned in our values of the fact that as much as I think I get angry about the ownership than you, despite the fact that you're a season ticket holder and spend probably significantly more at the consignment stands than I ever would, because you use all of the facilities they've introduced, right? Things like the fan zone you go. It's a nicer place for you to go with your kids rather than just wandering around in circles outside the game. So, it's too late for this season, but they've finally made some sort of a correct decision. They've brought in a manager that they know, a manager that they trust, a manager that is on their radar beforehand. They have removed the CEO that was in charge of the sort of money side of things and brought in, their primary investor. Ultimately, no manager was ever going to come in, and I know that there's a lot of sort of anger around the fact that Juric hasn't got a win until now, right? I think we kind of our opinions have probably changed since I started writing this, because we finally have got that first win. But that was sort of like, our new manager bounces a 0-0 at Fulham, and that was awful. But at the same time, no manager coming into these positions have had a massive new manager bounce, right? Like Leicester have replaced their new manager with Ruben Visceroy, had like a game or two, and have since lost everything. I guess where I'm at, and my opinion of the ownership, is that if you think of Southampton Football Club as a car that they took their foot off the gas, and the car's broken down, so they're trying to fix it, and hopefully this time they'll learn to not just use duct tape, right? Because that's what they did. They came in. New football owners have done other things before. They chucked a bunch of money, somebody they trusted in the Man City recruitment and said, oh, maybe we can just win everything with kids. Didn't work out that way. Suddenly we're relegated. They speak to this other guy. They get this other guy that's now been poached by Manchester United. Hope it's going really well for you over there, Wilcox. They seem to have a great time. And now actually have plans again to go, well, maybe that was a mistake that we made by not bringing in a director of football. They are trying to bring in a new director of football. There's a lot of talk behind the scenes. Apparently it's to do with work permits. Obviously they don't have the elite sporting ones the same as players do. So it's a lot more difficult than it would be otherwise. They have too much invested into this project to fail, right? These are not people who have so much money that they will just go, well, it's done, gone, throw it away. This is basically the business model of what they want to build. We are meant to be the flagship club for a reason, because we are the ones that will have the staying power, the selling power. Yes, they've spent a lot of time in their Turkish club. Yes, they've spent a lot of time in the French club. But there is investment there. They are talking to the media. They are making changes behind the scenes. Whether it's too little or too late for the season, what you can hope is that lessons have been learned, because once you've been relegated twice, I'm pretty sure you don't really want to be relegated for a third time. But there are other teams around us who have done supposedly the right things, right? Ipswich got Delap, but expected not to go down. Leicester, not too long ago, won the Premier League. We talk about our fall from grace and our fall from the heights of Europa League. Leicester literally won the Premier League.
Yeah.
Right? That is how far they fell, and then they managed to get themselves back up. There is potentially a lot of clubs around us as well that have broken financial rules with no punishment, right? We kind of all knew that was happening, because they've realized if they punish everybody with consistent point deductions, they're not going to have a league left. And we all know that kind of stuff is a bit dodge, right? But we are one of the ones to benefit with having money left over. But we do not have a fairy tale where some owner has swooped in and we're not going to get everything we want. But our club does live to fight another day. We are sustainable in a way that means that we are not going to just collapse tomorrow. We will get to support Southampton Football Club for the foreseeable future. Does it mean that we're going to get even more ridiculous types of shirts and shirt sponsors, and stuff is going to get more expensive? Yeah, that's fortunately the state of the world and the state of football. Football is a product now, regardless of whether we want it or not. For it to be as sustainable and to have the entertainment value that we want out of it, it means that football is just going to be like the way it is. It would be lovely to have it back the olden days. If you want that, you can go to your local Sunday league team, or alternatively go see a non-league team, right? People like Eastleigh crying out for fans on a weekly basis. But we all know that that's not how picking a football club mostly works. For our younger listeners, I guess what I wanted to point out was that football can change in the blink of an eye, again, in a decade. I joked and I said I thought Greg was mad for saying in 10 years' time we could be in Europa League, but we could. In 10 years' time, we could accidentally win the Premier League. You think that's mad, but the season that Leicester won, the season before they almost went down, is mad. You look at the state of the football now, like Manchester United, still considered like a giant. But since Fergie left, you've looked at the string of managers they've had, the players they've had. You saw yesterday Marcus Rashford has now gone. Another one of their sort of talisman players where, football is different to how it was, but it can all change so quickly. you'd have never thought when he scored 30 goals in a season he would leave United, right?
Yeah.
And for our older listeners, like, you've seen the club go down and rise from the ashes time and time and time again. And we'll do it again. It just, unfortunately, I don't know what it is about this season. The damage was done so early. It's like, it feels so much more painful than it is. But we are all here because we love the club. We are all along for the ride no matter what. So here's to championship nights next year, where hopefully we can rebuild those head in the cloud moments, and Greg will be able to take his kids to Wembley again after telling them that we don't go every other year.
Absolutely.
Or it will be really exciting and maybe we'll win the league again, or
Yeah.
it won't be, but we will be here to fight another day, and we will still be able to be supporters of Southampton Football Club. And we are not the only people to suffer in the world of footballing chaos. It just turns out it's our year to be laughed at. But even then, I think that United and Spurs have got us beat.
Yeah. No, you're right. What a fantastic point you've made. Brilliant. I'd go back to that very interview with Dragan Solak, the one you mentioned that he didn't have to do, but decided to go to TalkSport and put himself in and talk about the situation. And he said something that a lot of people sort of took out of context and took the mick out of, where it was like, business isn't always a success first time. You've got to try and try again. And look, Richard Branson, our older listeners might remember, once launched Virgin Cola. So
he did.
if you want to write Nathan Jones off as Virgin Cola, and that goes on to become the global powerhouse that Virgin is today, then great. I'm here for it. It happens.
Again, like, some clubs, you look at sort of a Newcastle or a Man City in the way they've got their money. Some clubs essentially win a lottery, right? Man City had a time where they purchased every single player under the sun, but like, it's not really working out for them at the moment. But it's one of those things where that isn't how mostly life works. But we do have owners that I think care more about the club than people realise. And if that's just because they have a financial investment in the club, that's fine, because that means they'll protect that investment.
Yeah.
But we will still have a club to go and enjoy for years to come, because other clubs and other fans have not been as lucky in recent years, right?
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
So that's kind of where I'm at, is that, as the pessimist of the podcast,
very well put, and you're right.
Case for hope.
Very well put. You're right. We need to get behind it, and they have made mistakes and come out and owned it, and they are going to continue to make mistakes because that is how the world works. But they care, and that's what matters.
Yeah, and that's where I'm at. And as much as sometimes the idea of recording after we've lost 5-0 is another sense of just dread, even if it is also quite cathartic, it will not last forever. It's all temporary, everything. So we just need to enjoy the good and the bad, and hope that the decisions they make in the future are better ones. Simple as that.
If it leads to a Paul Ohonachu winner at St Mary's, that might be all this season needs to turn the positive tide.
And if it's a Sulemana winner at
they're
St.
getting
Mary's,
more money out of you anyway, so it's a win-win.
Get money out of me anyway. So thank you very much for joining us today, Saints fans. If you're still here, I realised that was a bit of a long one. It's a bit of thank you very much, Greg, for being my duck and listening to
mate, thank you. Brilliantly prepared. Thoroughly enjoyed it.
It's just, again, all of this sparked from you going, well, 10 years time we could be back in the Europa League, and I thought you were insane, and then it turns out I had so many more thoughts about it than I did. So as usual, you can find us on all the social media: Facebook, Twitter /X, Instagram, TikTok. We are on the official GSPN YouTube channel now as well. So yeah, give us a like, give us a follow, rate the podcast if you're enjoying it. We certainly love putting out content every day. It's been one of the things that have helped us get through what has been a real tough season. But we look forward to seeing you in the next one, which will potentially be something. We'll figure it out. Yeah, thank you, and good night, everybody.
Every club, every day. The Global Sports Podcast Network.